Dr. Fauci, thank you for making time. I know you're extremely busy, so we'll get to it. Today, the FDA urged caution with the use of chloroquine. What is the bottom line you want to tell the American people about treatments for COVID-19?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. A few days ago, the NIH came out with guidelines for the treatment of coronavirus disease. And what it does, it has put together a group of experts, independent experts, with people with extensive experience with coronavirus disease, as well as representatives from a number of societies. And the purpose of that was to examine the data as it exists now as to the proof or not of safety and or efficacy of any of a number of interventions that are out there being used. And I think it's easy for people to access that. It's coronavirustreatment.nih.gov. But let me just very quickly answer your question. And the fact is, there are no studies that prove definitively one way or the other that hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine works or not. So, as I've said publicly, it is really anecdotal. People have the impression that it might, but impressions in science don't really mean a lot. The way you get the answer is you do a good, controlled clinical trial and compare it to something that will give you a meaningful answer. So right now, what we're seeing is that there are some preliminary reports coming out that are being synthesized and described in the guidelines. And as we get further and further into it, the data look like there really is no solid evidence that this particular compound helps. There was one report which was not peer-reviewed, and it wasn't a lot of people, but nonetheless it showed that in fact there may be even some increase in deleterious effect of those who were taking the hydroxychloroquine. But I don't think you can make a definitive statement, because there are a lot of variables in that study which indicate that maybe the sickest people were the ones who got it. The bottom line in answer to your question is that there is no evidence at all right now that says that this compound is beneficial.
North Carolina joined South Carolina with closing schools for the remainder of the year. You have said that testing is the key to unlocking restrictions and, I guess, getting us back to what was normal. Why is testing the key to everything?
Yeah, because testing is not the only thing, and I think it's important to point that out. It's one of the most and very important components of a multiphasic way, a really I would say 5 or 6 several things that you need to do. Probably the most important thing is if you have the ability to recognize clinically, specifically when you're not in the middle of an influenza season, because the CDC has their ILI, influenza-like illness, where they track illnesses in sentinel places throughout the country in a syndromic way. So you could tell if there's activity in your community just by the little spokes that come up. Testing is important because you want to get a feel for what is going on in the community at a certain level, but also when you get someone who's infected, you need to identify them with a test, isolate them, get them out of circulation so they do not infect others, and then do contact tracing for the people with whom they come into contact with. So I have said many times, and I'll say it again, for a community, a city, a state, to go and start gradually heading towards getting back to normal, you have to have the ability that when you see these little blips, which they will occur, there's no doubt, if you have coronavirus in your community and you pull back on mitigation, you can expect that you will see people getting infected. If you have the ability to immediately contain that, then the process towards opening will be much easier and will continue. If you don't have the capability of identifying, isolating, and contact tracing, what you will see are spikes that will set you back as opposed to get you forward towards so-called opening up the country and opening up America again. So yes, testing. What? Go ahead.
Talking about opening up America. Obviously, you know the RNC is coming to Charlotte this late summer. What do you think that looks like?
You know, it's what is going to look like is going to depend on the ability of Charlotte to respond. It is highly likely that given the strong mitigations that we have put out throughout the country and the currently recommended guidelines for everyone, including Charlotte, is to take a look at where you are, and if the number of cases, the number of diagnoses go down consistently over 14 days, to then take the next step into phase 1. If you do that successfully and succeed in phase 1, to take the next step to phase 2. If you're successful, the next step to phase 3. If you are successful in doing that, by the time you get to the summer, I don't think that there's going to be zero coronavirus around. I think that would be too much to ask for. But the level will be so well contained that you will be able to get to some sort of normality. The level of normality will depend on how successfully you get into the different phases. So I have cautious optimism that things will be considerably better this summer. It won't be completely out of the woods. This virus is not going to disappear. That I can guarantee. It's how we deal with it that will contain it will be the important factor.
And finally, sir, is there anything as you're watching these broadcasts and reading these articles that you wish we could focus more on? Is there anything that we're missing in this whole story?
No, I think the reporting, for the most part, has been really quite good. I mean, this is something that has dominated the attention of the American public. You know, I think fortunately or unfortunately, today in April of 2020, we live in a 24-hour news cycle, which means people have to say something every time they're on there. And often you start getting into things that who's to blame for what, and it becomes politicized and things like that. That's not helpful. I mean, that's not the media's fault. They're just reporting on what's going on. But I would hope that as we're going through this global crisis, that we focus on what our goal is, our common global and country goal is. That's what I wish would happen. Again, the media plays a part in that, but they're not the fault. They just report what's going on.
Well, Doctor, I certainly wish you the best, and thank you for making time.
Good to be with you. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.